Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. It's an honor to present a supplier diversity webinar with all of you and my esteemed panelists. Incredibly excited to have Ralph and Avery Moore here and Omar Brown as well. And I will share my screen here briefly, and then Adrian, if you want to do our little Be Local intro, I invite you to do so.
Yeah, I'm happy to do so, and wanted to first thank the panelists and Robin so much, first of all, for lending their time and knowledge to this very important topic around supplier diversity. This is our second in the series covering this topic, and we may do others depending on interest and whether or not we think we've exhausted the topic, which is unlikely given how rich it is. First off, I wanted to say that my name is Adrian Gershom. I'm the head of marketing and digital strategy at a certified B Corp here in Illinois called Sea Change. Certified B Corps are companies that have committed to a triple bottom line of purpose, profit, and planet. And the organization that is sponsoring this webinar is Be Local Illinois, which represents the 34 businesses in the state of Illinois that have made that commitment to a triple bottom line of purpose, profit, and planet, and have obtained certification as a B Corp. So not only are we interested in covering topics like supplier diversity, we are very interested in encouraging businesses to exhibit all manner of social and environmental impact and do the things that businesses need to do to help make our planet stronger, healthier, and more diverse. So with those few things said, if you have any interest in talking more about B Corps, feel free to reach out to myself or Robin. But with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Robin Lustbader, who's today's moderator and is also the chair of Be Local Illinois' Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion sub-org. So thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you, Adrian, and thank you for continuing to be a great leader in the Be Local Illinois space. All right, friends. So reimagining our supplier diversity programs, we have with us Ralph G. Moore from RGMA, Omar Brown from Big Ten, and Avery Thomas Moore also from RGMA. So we will be getting into the meat of our content here shortly, but a brief agenda for all the things that we are looking to discuss, cover, and learn about today. So we will briefly get into supplier diversity as an issue, kind of do a refresh from our previous webinar of what it might look like, what does it mean, and how it can apply to your business or organization. We'll get into expansive educational experiences across the industry with some of our panelists, and then we'll really get into the meat of, okay, what does this look like in action? How do we improve it? How do we innovate around it? And that's where our friends at the RGMA are incredibly skilled and talented in this space. So first, we'll do some brief introductions. So my name is Robin Lustbader. I am the Senior Engagement Officer at an organization and social enterprise in Chicago called Cara Collective. And we are a workforce development organization, 501c3, with 2 social enterprises that bring in revenue. And our focus is on helping folks experiencing poverty in any number of ways to get back to gainful employment, to increase their financial freedom and economic mobility. And with that, I will pass it to my friend, Ralph. You are muted, Ralph. There you go.
I'm sorry. Hi, Ralph Moore. Happy to be here. There's a natural intersection between B corporations and supplier diversity. Personally, I've been in this field. This has been my life's work. I've been in this field since 1974, started my company in 1979. Looking forward to a very engaging discussion with the panel and with you in the audience.
Thanks, Ralph. Avery.
Hi, I'm Avery Thomas Moore, a senior consultant at RGMA. A lot of my background has been in working with impact funds, impact investing in Africa, as well as startups in Africa. So I think that it will be interesting to discuss, like, how do you look at this from a smaller company perspective, and just kind of how do you start the process as we go along.
Great, thanks, Avery. And Omar, take us away.
All right. Hello, everyone. Omar Brown. I currently work in the unique intersection of people strategy and diversity strategy, but I've had several roles across supplier diversity and diversity. And I was a consultant with Deloitte Consulting where I did diversity strategy. So happy to be here and lend my voice.
Awesome. Thanks, Omar. So one of the things we wanted to do today was really get into just a refresh of what does supplier diversity mean? How can it be folded into a full organization or company's practices? So when we think about supplier diversity programs, we really want to think about this 51%. The 51% is crucial when you are analyzing and scrutinizing the businesses that you want to fold into supplier diversity, whether they relate to women, LGBTQ communities, disabled folks, or otherly abled folks, veterans, and different minorities. So we think about this both internally and externally for folks who are supplying your internal items, let's say your snack bar inside of your office building, and also your vendors on the external side of your business as well. And so what we'll hear a lot about today are the different contracts that can be written, the different styles of supplier diversity that can be folded into an organization, depending on how that organization is structured, depending on your product and your services, and what that might look like. So to get a little bit deeper into this, I'd like to go to you, Omar, to kind of give us a really nice overview picture of these different roles you've had, and also what that has meant for supplier diversity inside these different organizations.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'll start with this. My career journey didn't actually start with me working at the University at the City of Chicago. And I generally tell people, before I started working for the City of Chicago, I'd never heard of a minority business enterprise or women business enterprise. It just was not part of the language that I would say I spoke. I worked in public finance and I worked in HR benefit consulting. And so those topics did not come up, right? And I started working in the city. They revamped their small business diversity business program. And I was hired with a couple other individuals and really tasked with creating a compliance program. And so for government entities, the compliance program is after we've attached a goal or spend of diverse firms, how do we ensure that that happens? And so when I took on the role, I took it on more as auditing. I took it more as, let me check this contract and check the spend. By the time I left the role, I realized that compliance was really about engaging with diverse firms to help them understand what we are selling or where there are opportunities so they can be successful. And I left that role and I took a role with the University of Illinois. Even though it was a supplier diversity role, compliance, I guess, was still a piece of it. But there, University of Illinois had a completely different take on it. University of Illinois, and I just want to preface it, I didn't do any construction projects, so all their professional services, any other services but construction. But University of Illinois, I feel like they basically hired me to get the word out that the University of Illinois wants to work with diverse businesses. And so when you think about starting your program, it's how do you brand yourself to be inclusive? How do you sell the fact that, you know what, we buy goods and we'd like to diversify who we buy from. From there, I left and I became head of diversity for CTA, which interesting enough, CTA has construction and has large businesses. And there was really about, we were in the middle of doing the Red Line project. So anyone that doesn't know, Red Line is large rail that goes from north to south. But we were really engaged with Black businesses and how do we make sure that as we're doing this work on the South Side, that we engage with Black businesses. Well, as soon as that work wrapped up, we started doing work in other neighborhoods, or we had other groups saying, if you're gonna spend money with Black businesses, how are you gonna spend money with Hispanic businesses and Asian businesses? And it just kept on going. So from there, that program, compliant, like I don't know how else to say, compliance will always be a piece of it, but it was really about thinking about spend and opportunities for different groups, along with, and this is probably the first time I really experienced it, you have a company that buys large amount of items, right? And a lot of times diverse firms can't buy at that level. So how do you break apart these contracts to really be inclusive? How do you think about what you buy in ways that can support businesses that are local to you? And we used to have the saying, we want the businesses to reflect the community we work in. And that was really our mantra. So from there, I actually went into consulting. And I would say that there's an interesting article in USA Today about George Floyd's murder and the commitment that organizations made to diversity. It's focused on HR, but I'll say the organizations made that same commitment to supplier diversity. That was one of the ways that they can show commitment. So leveraging some of my experience, I would provide strategies on how they can increase their supplier diversity. And then I'll fast forward to now, and I believe he's on. Big Ten is looking right now at how do we increase our diverse supplier spend. So we have individuals, Sabik Patel, who'll be leading that for us. But prior to this point, I don't know if we really talked about it as an organization. And now we're like, let's start by how do we analyze what we're spending? How do we think about making sure that organizations know that the Big Ten wants to be engaged with them? So going through that full spectrum of starting really only with compliance and making sure that contracts are spent to now I'm at a different place where we're trying to build the program and how do we start the program from scratch.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Omar. And I think it's so interesting, right? Human resources as a field also has a lot of compliance, and then you also have a lot of experience. And when we're talking about supplier diversity, we're thinking a lot about how to connect those two things and how to be intentional about it, how to reach communities where they are. So I love you sharing your experiences there. Thank you. Great. So now we'll just go a little bit into supplier diversity and B Corps. So I just wanted to touch on this lightly since we are representing B Local Illinois. And as Ralph said earlier in the call, there is a natural affiliation between B Corps and supplier diversity. And I think that expands even into just the general business world and the way that all organizations and companies run their programs. So generally speaking, when we think about supplier diversity programs, these are a few areas that companies may want to build some codification. Having a corporate policy statement, having what Omar was just talking about, that commitment to diversity in this process, making sure that it is folded into the business practices and not just in the experiences of your employees and your constituents. Having a cross-functional advisory council, this is also incredibly important to me because as we all know in business, once there reaches a certain level of action, there's a question of oversight, there's a question of feedback, there's a question of how do we make sure these things come together? How do we make sure that we are not being myopic or biased in the way that we present them inside the company and outside the company, but rather have a more holistic, have a more equitable approach to this entirely. Having corporate goals, determining what your future goals are, and then using benchmark KPIs and metrics to gain your to get yourself to where you want to see the company, and then finally your training process. How does this work? How are we training managers and supervisors and staff members internally? And then having training conversations on the external side about what this means to your partners, to your vendors, to these contract holders, and making sure that that is done so in a thoughtful and intentional way. And then second, I wanted to mention the B impact assessment. So for those who are not familiar, the B impact assessment is available and free to any company. You do not have to be a certified B Corp. You don't even have to be B curious yet. This is simply a wonderful tool, and especially as we've seen these new SEC rulings come out around ESG metrics, this is a really great way to kind of consider where your company is and to look at the B impact assessment. And when we think about supplier diversity inside of this role, supplier diversity, to Omar's point, that compliance, you're looking at governance, you're looking at workers, both internal and external, the community partnerships, of course, your environment and sustainability and how that folds into supplier diversity along your entire pipeline from beginning to end, and your customers. Customers will always come back and value your commitment to diversity, your efforts to make sure that your pipeline is equitable and diverse. So all of these things can help achieve a higher score with the B impact assessment, and these are the 5 areas that the B Corp assessment rates on. All right. Now we all know this is a very brief refresh, but all the wonderful benefits of having a supplier diversity program, of course, the D&I commitment, customer desire, Increasing competition, that's another really great area to just think about. When you're thinking about branding your company and your organization, supplier diversity can play a huge role in that against your competitors if they are not showing the same generative commitment to these issues. Supporting B Corp standards, increased brand equity, employee recruitment and retention. I work at a workforce development organization. Recruitment and retention is difficult right now. This is true across every industry and every sector. So having these little pockets of joy and of commitment to diversity and equity really mean a lot to employees, to staff, and to your partners in the world. And then finally, market development and changing demographics across the industries. So some things that we want to continue thinking about. And I will hand it over to Avery Thomas Moore to help us talk a little bit about what it can look like to start a program at many different scales. Avery, take us away.
All right, thank you, Robin. So we kind of put a couple questions up here about, what should you be thinking about as you start on this journey? And the first one is, why are we doing this? As Omar pointed out, a lot of companies start because of a compliance requirement, right? They have a customer that requires it, they're a government agency that requires it, so they have to do something. But I mean, as Robin mentioned in the previous slide, I think you also look at the changing demographics of the country. You look, employees and other stakeholders are interested in this topic. And people, it is something that can differentiate you over time. So I think that's probably like the most important thing for people just starting, is to have a really good why that rallies the troops, is to kind of get some momentum behind starting the program. And once you determine that, you have to determine, what is your current state? Where are we right now? What kind of spend do we have? What kind of engagement do we have? Do people know that we are doing business with minority suppliers or want to do business with diverse suppliers? And kind of take stock of where you are. Then kind of look at, where are we trying to go? So if you once you set that baseline, you can look at setting KPIs and metrics to say, okay, this is where we think how we can move forward, and this is how we're going to assess our process, this is how we're going to measure ourselves against that. And that would feed into your plan, right? So you know where you are, you want to go, and now you need to kind of set that route and make that plan, and then the plan will also kind of determine your resource commitment. How many people do you need? What kind of training do you need to have? Who needs to be involved in that kind of training? How do you share that information? Are you going to join different councils? Are you going to be, which ones? Or how active are you going to be? Trade shows? Like, there's a lot of different ways that you can invest resources in your supplier diversity program. But it's important that all of that feeds from your why. And that you're doing it in a way that is measurable over time, so that everybody can appreciate the process. And with that, I will turn it over to Ralph G. Moore to take us through the 5 levels of supplier diversity.
Thank you, Avery. Now, understand, this is the first time I've known Avery for 36 years. And this is the first time she's introduced me as Ralph G. Moore, as I am her father. Okay. But that's all right. We'll work with it. As we move into the 5 levels, and it's really interesting. Well, first, Robin, you hit some great points, and I'm really glad we're having this conversation with B corporations, because there's 2 myths that we need to eliminate right now, eradicate. B corporations are for-profit corporations. They make money. So you can, there's triple bottom line, you can do good and do well at the same time. Supplier diversity is not a social program, it's a business program. So let's straighten that out now, where we start. And one of the reasons we put together the RGMA 5 levels, and now it's trademark. Matter of fact, we did this in 1994 when we first put this together, was to talk about the 5 stages. Matter of fact, there's a level 0 that we don't talk about and won't waste time for those companies who just don't care about supplier diversity. And my lawyer told me to stop calling them by name, so I won't call their names out today. But we should stop doing business with companies who can't show you what they're doing in supplier diversity. So I'll leave it at that. As we move forward in this whole conversation around the 5 levels, at level 1, you have companies that are just getting started. And Robin, you brought up a critical point, the whole ESG conversation, Wall Street. There's an explosion in corporate America trying to figure out what is this, what goes into ESG, number 1. And people are finally connecting the dots and realizing that supplier diversity makes a difference. So our emails are blowing up. People are trying to figure this out. Matter of fact, we're having a webinar on June 15th. And Avery, you might want to share the link for our webinar or the invitation in the chat box. But I know I put her on the spot there. She probably wasn't expecting that. But at level 1, these are companies trying to figure out, why are we doing this? Going back to what Avery said, what's the why? And the why has gotten very, much more important here recently. Robin, you talked about the demographics. 40% in the 2020 census self-declared as multicultural. 50%, I can guess that 50% are women. Those 2 categories are included in supplier diversity. And when you do the math, matter of fact, I'm a CPA, used to work at Arthur Anderson, so I can do the math. The math tells me that 70% of your stakeholders would qualify as a multicultural vendor if in fact they had a business. It's time to make this a business conversation. So at level 1, they're trying to figure out, and the main issue at level 1 is how do we get leadership engaged? And it comes with a compelling value proposition. Then at level 2, and this is a very interesting point at level 2, because if you don't have a compelling value proposition, your corporation or your program can get stuck at level 2, a compliance-focused program. Because now the only reason you're doing this is to check the box with the government or check the box with Walmart or whoever you're working with. As a matter of fact, 2008, we helped Walmart create their 2nd-tier program. And it's important because corporations now are looking at this as a business proposition, and they're asking their channel partners to do the same through 2nd-tier programs. But what happens at level 2, they do just enough to check the box. So it might be staff part-time. It's only it's a numbers game, just trying to get a number to send to a customer. And senior leaders are still not engaged. So it's not till you get to level 3, you start seeing some action or some traction within the organization. But the problem with level 3 traditional program, senior leaders are still not involved, but they look at it as it's the right thing to do. It's something they talk about at Black History Month and Hispanic Heritage Month, Women's Business Month, but it's not integrated into the business. So that's why these are called programs. And it's the early stage program, compliance focused program, traditional program. Then when you get to level 4, advanced strategy, you go from program to process. When it's a program, the supplier diversity owner is the, Ralph, how are you doing with your supplier diversity program? And when it becomes, you get to level 4, now you're getting to how are we doing as an organization with our supplier diversity strategy? And the strategy is integrated throughout the organization. So it's not just, and this is where it's interesting. There's some companies who claim to have these great programs. And again, I have personally trained more supplier diversity leaders than anyone else in the world. I was part of a mission that introduced supplier diversity to South Africa. I was on a session just 2 weeks ago in the UK. This is a global conversation, and there's an awful lot of people blowing smoke, and there's no fire, okay? The reality is, we have an assessment tool, and I'm gonna talk about, Avery will talk about that in a moment. We will distinguish where you are, but we will also help you get to that next level. Because as we talked about with ESG, there's a need for measurable metrics, quantifiable metrics that can be benchmarked as well as reported to various agencies. So at level 4, the strategy is now integrated throughout the sourcing strategy, the sales strategy. The metrics are used in ESG reporting. Senior leaders are aware and engaged in the process. But the difference between level 4 and level 5, world-class strategies, it's now a part of the business. It's embedded in their strategy. It's integrated throughout the enterprise, not just procurement. There's shared responsibility, shared accountability throughout the organization, and it's embedded in their ESG strategy. Again, we'll be talking about that in a couple of weeks. But senior leaders are not just engaged, but they're recognized process champions because they understand the benefits of this to the organization. One quick story to tell on this. 25 years ago, we developed we were on retainer for 6 years at Major League Baseball. And Omar, he knows sports as well as anyone. Every team has a culture. Every team, so we understand we're working with the headquarters. Bud Selig was the champion on this. And matter of fact, and most people don't know this, but it was Jerry Reinsdorf who was head of the committee that really embraced supplier diversity 25 years ago. And long story short, Major League Baseball to this day has the most compelling and effective, impactful supplier diversity program in sports. But what made it successful is that it's aligned to the strategy, structure, and culture of each team. Some teams are small businesses, others are a conglomerate of large businesses. Some, again, you can imagine the team in Atlanta has a much more healthier community around it, a more robust supply chain, diverse business supply chain around it than a team maybe in other parts of the country. But they all have come together to say diversity is important to our sports. And what's important about sports and supplier diversity is the influence. And it's interesting. And what we love about the connection with B corporations, you have influence because many people, many for-profits and nonprofits look to B corporations' best practices to say, whoa, they're doing all these good things in the community and making money for their shareholders. How do they do it? And we're excited to be a part of this conversation because part of how they do it is with diverse suppliers. Mm-hmm. Next slide, please.
Well said, Ralph.
Well, thank you. And the assessment program, and again, I'm going to give you a little bit of a little introduction to what we put together. Again, we have a supplier diversity playbook that's 43 years old, and we keep updating it. We brought technology. Next slide, please. And one of the things we talk about with the 5 levels, how we measure those 5 levels, and this is our secret sauce, but we're going to make it available to you because the fact that you're on this call, you're in this meeting, you have an interest in B corporations, you have an interest in supplier diversity. Those are 2 elements that can change the world. That's how I feel about it, and I'm going to share whatever tools I have with you. We have this assessment, and these 8 components really are the foundations of a world-class supplier diversity strategy. We start with a strategic vision, and that vision is interesting. Many people who want to start a supplier diversity program, and going back to what Avery talked about, starting with the why, too many companies, too many organizations, they start with, okay, well, give me a list of suppliers and let's go do some business with them. No. That's the wrong way. Because and what happens there, now you're kind of forcing it. Make sure you have a reason for doing this. And also make sure you align this with your company. So that strategic vision is what's our purpose? What's our mission? And part of the strategic vision is how does it complement my stakeholders, including not just your shareholders, but your employees. How does it fit into what we our values? And we talk about this a lot in our companies. That supplier diversity has come to the crossroad where it's the integration, it's the intersection of value and values. And it's very important to understand that there are thousands, tens of thousands of brilliant minority women CEOs that are running fabulous companies that bring value equal to or greater than what you can get in the marketplace from non-minority suppliers. This is not a sacrifice. We've had people talk about, well, I got to pay more, or they're not competitive. That might have been the dialogue 30 years ago. And every company has a guy, Charlie, who's been there 42 years, who can tell you about that minority firm that didn't do something in 1984. The good news is, let's get Charlie a watch. It's about retirement time. Charlie, have a good retirement. We need to get you out of the way. There's fresh thinking. The millennials are moving into management positions. We're going to change the world and change the perception of supplier diversity. Then you look at process design. How does it fit within our strategy, structure, and culture? This is where a lot of companies fall down too. You have to get it beyond your procurement organization. People look at value chain, at supply chains. You have to look at your value chain. And John Rogers says it very well. He calls it business diversity. We attempted that, but I realized our soapbox is too small to try to change the nomenclature of supplier diversity. So we think that you can change the name that fits your culture. But at this moment, and I think as I look at Europe and other parts of the world, supplier diversity is the name that most companies use. But how you fit it into your company is tailored to the way you're structured. Opportunity assessment is another critical area. Where are the opportunities? Before you go out and say, I need suppliers, you need them to do what? And one of the mistakes that's been made over the years, don't take your best supplier, non-minority supplier, say, okay, we're going to take half of the widgets from Joe and give them to this minority supplier. Your sourcing professionals will fall out, number one. You will lose credibility because if it's not broken, don't fix it. But every buyer, every category manager in America has a relationship they wish they didn't have. Bring in these brilliant minority businesses to replace those troubled categories where you need help or new products and new opportunities. So that process, that opportunity assessment is looking at where do we have opportunities, either new or replacing incumbents who aren't performing, or even when you look at John Rogers and Melody Hobson, what they've done with Project Black, there are private equity funds that will fund the acquisition of a non-minority supplier and convert that into a majority supplier. But there's a lot out there that we can do. And then after you look at the opportunity assessment, where the opportunities are, then you get to the sourcing. And it's really outreach, sourcing, and capacity building. And that could be a whole webinar to itself. So I'm not going to stop here because I'm going to run out of time. Then we look at measurement and reporting, and this is why the ESG is so important. ESG issue is so important. Historically, we've been playing games with the numbers. People take everything out of the denominator. Well, micro program, we're spending 42% with minority firms. That's a lot. Okay, there's not enough capacity in the marketplace for a major corporation to have 42% minority spend. The only people who have hit 40% are some of the utility companies who have made a concerted effort to hit a number like that. And let me say this, and I'm gonna call a name, but it's a very positive name. McDonald's has hit that number because they have probably the #1 company in America when it comes to the percentage of minority companies that they do business with. And I'm gonna get in trouble. I'm leaving a few people out, but I gotta keep moving. Education and training. Robin, you mentioned how important training is. Again, training is critical. We have created a whole online training platform in our GMA. I see my friend Bruce Montgomery is on this call. He's bringing training to the state of Illinois to minority businesses, but we have to train all stakeholders. It's a new day in supplier diversity. So let's train the corporations, the leadership on why it's important, the folks who are running procurement, how to integrate it into your strategy, and the MBEs and WBEs and other diverse suppliers, how to interface with corporations and how to win. And your value proposition is no longer, I'm a diverse supplier, where's my contract? We tell our clients, if a minority firm or a diverse firm approaches you thinking that by being a diverse supplier is a value proposition, throw them out. They don't get it. We don't have time for that. And people still do that. But the reality is, like I said earlier, there are brilliant companies out here doing great work. Just got to find them. And again, one of the places you find them is staying close to B Corp Illinois, because they're going to be that point, that gathering spot for diverse suppliers who are working with B corporations. And then your peers and your suppliers can help you find some. Communication, and again, for those of you who are into Harvard Business Review, there's an article, Leading Change, John Cotter. It's the #1 requested reprint in the history of the magazine. And he talks about why transformation efforts fail. in that article. And one of the 8 components is they fail because they're under communicated by a factor of 10. What supplier diversity advocates do, what they do, the worst thing they do, the least thing they do well is communicate the value proposition, communicate what they're trying to do, communicate the fact that supplier diversity is an essential part of our strategy. So the messages are important, the stakeholders are important. You got to share that senior leadership is at the table. And then process improvement. You have to keep making it better, easier. And this is where, and I don't want to be critical, but be very careful. Don't fall into the trap. Those of you who are advocates, and I see many advocates that have joined the organization, joined this chat. Don't fall into the trap of, well, we're going to have an impact sourcing strategy. No, you have to put supply diversity embedded into your normal sourcing strategy. There's only going to be one. Your chief procurement officer can only manage one sourcing strategy. If you find yourself in a special program or an asterisk, or we have an impact sourcing program that's run by Charlie, but he's over here, all it takes is a stumble and people talk about a recession is coming. Let that recession hit your bottom line. That special program is going to go out the side door. You don't want to be a part of a special program. You want to be embedded into the strategy and the sourcing strategy of the company. Next slide. Matter of fact, next slide is Avery. So I'm going to turn it back over to Avery to give us a few more comments as relates to our assessment.
Thanks, Dad.
Thank you.
So with all that being said, I think, now that you kind of understand how we look at assessing programs, what the levels are, the key point is that there's these 5 levels, but then how do you know which level you are? It's based on your performance against the 8 components that my dad just went through. And so what we've developed is an assessment tool that will help you through that process, right? Part of the tricky part about getting started and showing progress over time, and even now with the new SEC requirements, and as the S of ESG becomes more prominent, people are looking for better data. This all kind of coalesces into why we built this product. There is a digital survey that you complete that will kind of ask you about all the 8 components and take you through the whole process, and that will give you kind of a baseline. Right, so we'll score the survey, and then it will give you a learning journey based on your response, right? So it will tell you, these are the things that you should consider for each component to move your program from point A to point B. There will also be dashboards that will kind of show you where you perform on each component. There's a spider chart so you can see how you perform on each component relative to each other. Some people are really strong at measurement and reporting, but they're not great at process design, for instance. So we'll give you a lot of information and insights on where your program really is and how you can make change. And then what we recommend is that you use this tool to measure your progress over time, right? So if you do this assessment quarterly, maybe twice a year, what you can then do is say, okay, I've taken the learning journey, I've implemented some changes, and now we've moved a little bit higher on process improvement. We've moved a little bit higher on education and training. And so that gives you kind of this data set that shows you're making progress, and you can also use it to show where you are on these 5 levels as kind of like an independent benchmark of the progress of your supply diversity program that you can use to compare to other supply diversity programs. And so we have an annual subscription for that. It also comes with a lot of training and videos, so especially geared towards supply diversity professionals, that will take you through each of the 8 components, as well as the history of supply diversity itself, to kind of help you actualize and implement your supply diversity program.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Avery, for sharing all of that. And we will be providing information about RGMA and how to get in touch with both Avery and Ralph in the future. They continue to be incredible champions of this work in Illinois and beyond. I am a believer that supplier diversity, like you said, Ralph, is a global issue. It is something that as our supply chains continue to kind of morph and evolve, this is going to be something that is crucial to hopefully every continent and continues to be thought of as such. So we are going to stop screen sharing, but briefly just wanted to call attention to this page here. For those of you who are less familiar with B corporations, I absolutely encourage you to take a look at the websites, both for B Local Illinois, which is our board here in Illinois that Adrian chairs, as well as B Corp on the whole. So I did see a question, and I'm going to stop my screen share here so we can all see each other. So I did see a question in the Q&A that was about, what are B Corps? What are these things that we're talking about? What are these businesses? What is this certification? So I'll give you my 2 cents, and then Adrian, I will invite you to be a little bit more robust in the answer as the champion at Sea Change. So B Corps are companies that have, one, applied to become B Corps and gone through the B Corp assessment tool. And so there is a scale of points that a company can reach, and it has to hit a minimum of 80 to qualify for B Corp certification. There are fees on top of that. So essentially, when I think holistically about the B Corp certification, it's essentially a third-party auditing program that kind of looks at your entire company in those 5 categories we saw earlier: governance, workers, community, et cetera. And so then with that certification, you get the wonderful B Corp logo. And when people look at your product, they see that logo, they know inherently that you have put value in all these areas of your business, including the work and life of everyone that you touch along your supply chain. But Adrian, if you'd like to provide a little bit more context.
I can give a really quick, I mean, you did an amazing job covering it, Robin, in terms of, you know, what the certification looks like and what it covers. I would amplify a little bit the idea that it's an objective, third-party, rigorous, quantifiable thing that a lot of other kinds of things don't contain. So I think there's a lot of analogs that exist out there that might help you understand, like USDA organic for food, LEED or WELL certification for architecture, or fair trade in some instances for the way like supply and businesses are being run. Operates a little bit like those kinds of certifications, except that it's looking holistically at a business across those 5 dimensions that Robin mentioned, those 5 stakeholder areas. Is it a perfect thing? Absolutely not. I mean, there's, you know, like many things in life, like it could be better, but I'd say right now I'm happy to say it's the best way for companies to quantify their social and environmental performance. And the thing that inspires me is that the standards continually are being changed and raised. The bar continues to get higher all the time, so that companies need to recertify every 3 years. And if you're not continually improving on your social and environmental impact, you will fall outside of the window of being able to certify. So it's a great way to, as a business, demonstrate and quantify your commitment to the social and environmental fabric of our society.
Absolutely, thank you. And then we did get a follow-up B Corp question. So this question is there any evidence that B Corps value DE&I when it comes to doing business with MBE business owners? So let's see, do you all know what that question is asking specifically?
Well, and again, part of being the old man on the block, I know a lot of the players, and that question's from Bruce Montgomery. Bruce and I have had this conversation for 40 years. I mean, we're like 2 guys at the barbershop who just been talking. Bruce is now a leader. Matter of fact, he's on a state panel advancing DE&I. And he asked a question. It's really linked to this whole conversation that came up that you mentioned earlier. All the promises, all the commitments after the George Floyd murder. Some are real, some are not, and I won't call names. I know some that are not. But the reality, Bruce is basically saying, well, where is the evidence that this is happening? And my response would be, that's why we're having this conversation today. The fact that B Corporation has invited our GMA to join this conversation. Omar has been a part of a conversation, earlier conversation. This is not the first time they've had this topic on the agenda. And I think what Robin and Adrian represent is there's a part of the B Corp movement, a major part of the B Corp movement that understands we're all in this together, including diverse suppliers. And I'm gonna get in trouble too. That's the other thing about getting old. You get too old to care. I just say stuff that has to be said. And Bruce and I have had this conversation too, because over the years, if you looked at the economic development initiatives over the years, they left minority businesses out completely. Incubators and a lot of other stuff. It was, oh yeah, well, yeah, we have a minority. Where's our minority guy? Yeah, he's on the second floor over there making, well, I don't know what he's making, but we have one in our 42 company incubator. Those discrepancies, I'll just use that word, have plagued us in other initiatives, economic development initiatives. So the fact that we're having this conversation is a very positive sign. And Bruce, stay on the case. We need you in the trenches like you have been. But I assure you, I wouldn't be on this call if I didn't think that these folks are serious about incorporating supplier diversity into the overall strategy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ralph. And I agree with you. I think that as more agencies come out with requirements, as we see more rulings in the SEC world and in ESG, we are going to continue to see the B Corp movement expand. And I will just add to that context that B Corp is an international organization, and it is split up essentially by continent. So there's a US and North America B Corp, there is a European B Corp organization, and they all have different leadership that talk to each other nonstop. But I know that Jorge is the new CEO in the US, and he did an incredible listening tour in 2020 and 2021 to really listen to stakeholders, and is going to continue to revise and change our standards, particularly around human capital, human experience, DE and I, and B, of course, that belonging that is so crucial to these issues. So one question that we got earlier on, this is a question from Claude, is how communications and marketing relate to supplier diversity programs, both in awareness, in efficiency, but would love to hear from some of you around how that has affected your ability to be successful.
I'll chime in. Hey, Claude. I think it's telling your story. In Ralph's chart, he went around, communication was there. It's that to me is the communication on the back end. But when I was at University of Illinois, one of the big pieces was University of Illinois was not doing a lot of diverse business, right? But part of it was diverse businesses didn't know that University of Illinois had a program. And so communicating on the front end that we want to do it, right? And that going to places where the businesses are, and then reviewing your contracts to say, you know what, can we break this up into 3 contracts, which allow smaller firms to work on it? It's those type of pieces. But I think you have to be proactive and intentional and letting firms know that you want to do business with them. And some of that is showing up in their spaces. Some of that is intentionally reaching out to firms to say, I know you're in this space, would you bid on our contract, right? Or are you willing to submit an RFP? So it is a piece of communicating your work. I don't think they're talking about like bragging, but or like putting on your website, right? Like, I think it's a little bit more than that. Go ahead, Ralph.
Well, if I may, and again, and Omar, you hit it right on the head. It's critical up front, and just to clarify, those 8 components, that's sequential. I mean, again, it happens in different orders, and really the communication is both internal and external. And I think I've seen too many companies, they have a great external program, but they haven't told the leadership what's going on. And if you really want to see what communication in action, how it works, go to the Walmart website, and I think it's still there. Doug McMillan's statement after the George Floyd murder was one of the most powerful CEO commitments or statements I've ever heard. And he made it clear. Matter of fact, I'm paraphrasing it. I don't have it directly, but he said, understand, we're going to change the way we work with African-American businesses. And if my managers don't understand that, they're going to have to find another place to work. Now, you rarely will hear a CEO make that powerful a statement, but that communicates to me. Again, if I'm driving my car to go shopping, I'm going to go past XYZ store. I'll go another mile so I can get to Walmart because I'm going to support a company that's going to support issues that are important to me, as he communicated that way. So communication is not only impactful, it really sets the stage for how, that moment of truth. When I make a decision on how I engage your company, what you've communicated to me is going to have a lot of impact on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Ralph, what you're speaking to is also the follow through, right? There are no words without actions. There is no impact without movement.
My favorite Ben Franklin quote is, well done is better than well said. And we're seeing that right now with the companies who are not following through on their George Floyd commitments.
Yes.
If I can add just one thing on top of that, Ralph and Robin, I couldn't agree more, partly because I'm in marketing myself, in addition to being in the B Corp community. Words and actions, if there's a misalignment between those two things, it's incredibly jarring, and it shows up in the way that the company presents itself in the world. So you really need what you're saying and what you're doing to be in complete alignment around these issues. Otherwise, there's serious problems. And I think one of the things that I like about B Corp certification, other than all the stuff that's associated with what went into getting it, is that it represents accountability. And so that if you get the certification as a company, you are accountable to the public and your employees. And if you're not living up to the standards that you say you've been living up to, you can be called out on it and you can lose your certification. And that's exactly the way it should work.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
One thing I would add quickly is just like an example that I've seen from our work with clients is really hitting on that internal communication. Because we had a client in the food space who was like, he was running the Supplier diversity program. They'd actually had some success, but people internally weren't really sold on what they were doing. And he really took the time to align what they were doing and why they were doing it with, round up that value proposition, align it with the strategy, structure, culture, and go back to them and say, we care about this is the economic impact in communities based on our doing business with these companies. These are the entrepreneurs that we've done business with. This is how many people they employ. And so when we talk about, communities where our stores are, when we talk about economic issues in those communities, realize that there is something that we're doing as an organization already that is having a measurable impact on that, and really communicating that internally changed people's perspective and got a lot more support for the program. And they don't tell that story externally, but just like really investing in that internal communication so that people realize that they can participate and why they should participate, and make sure it connects with them so that they're actively looking for opportunities as well.
Absolutely. And I have one final question, and this question I'm gonna throw it to you, Avery, and Omar, you're on backup. This is, what does supplier diversity look like for small businesses who may have unpredictable spends, and how has that? What experiences can you share from that?
I think that it really goes back to the why, right? So I think the 5 levels are not just about spend, right? It's not that the whole point of the way that the levels are designed is that it's not based on a dollar amount and once you cross that threshold, you move to the next level, right? So if you are a small organization, but you are actively, you have a value proposition, you know why you want to do it, you're looking for opportunities, you're communicating with those opportunities, you're doing the measurement to the extent you can, you're doing the outreach to the extent you can. You might not have a lot of people to train, but if you need to train them, you train them. Like, I think you can move forward at any level. And as your business grows, to my dad's point about going from a program to a strategy, this is already embedded in your company's process, right? Like this is, and as your company goes bigger, that process might become more resource intensive or more developed, and you might look at doing M&A and all this stuff, but you don't have to do all of that to have a successful program.
Thanks, Avery. Omar, anything to add from your experience?
I would just say, I used to describe supplier diversity as just going to a different barber, like or going to get your hair done at a different shop. It's a choice. To me, I just feel like a smaller organization can make that same choice. They can really reach out and find other sources for whatever they're buying or whatever they're purchasing. And they just have to make the choice. Like, I make a choice to go to a certain barber, I can make a choice to go to a different barber. It's an intentional choice. I'm making that choice. You can, if you're buying pencils, you can buy pencils from here, you can buy pencils from there. So it's really about willing to make that choice and be confident in it.
Mm-hmm. And I'll add one more thing, which is we can be bold in calling it supplier diversity regardless of the scale that we're at, right? I think a mom and pop store, a local bookshop, a local game store, if you're making that commitment, call it supplier diversity. Let's be bold in spreading that word regardless of the size of our organizations. So go ahead, Avery.
Oh, I was going to say quickly, I think also, if you're a smaller organization, this should really resonate with you, because this is the same way that you get customers, right? Like, to Omar's part about going to a different barbershop, you're also attracting probably larger customers who are making a choice to do a business. Even if it's a retail business, people are deciding to shop local. If you're a service business, people are deciding to do business with a B Corp. They're deciding to do business with a small business, right? So I think just take that same approach that you have with your customers, and you can extend that to your diverse suppliers.
100%. All right. Well, at 1 minute left.
One quick comment.
Yeah.
The only problem with family businesses is a moment that you discover that your daughter is smarter than you are. So
RGMA, a family business.
I'll just add that to my comments.
I love it. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to our panelists for joining us today. We will be following up with you with the recording. Adrian, any closing words, my fearless leader?
Or fearful sometimes. I just wanted to thank you all again for attending, and also thank our wonderful expert panelists for bringing their A game to this important topic. We're excited to have had a chance to share their knowledge, and we look forward to continuing potentially to explore this topic in future webinars. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.